Meredith is here to promote Love Letters.
Yes.
Yay.
The newest season of Love Letters. What's the theme for this one?
Can people change?
Can people
Great
change?
question.
It's a great question, and with some mildly depressing answers, some uplifting answers and depressing answers, because one of the big things I've learned from the experts, like the scientists, are like, technically after a certain age, you kind of can't. Like your brain,
Really?
well, you can change with the lowercase c, but we're talking about like big structural changes, and they're like your brain gets less plastic. So if you're like under 32, it's a lot easier to, open neural pathways and actually see the world differently than, a woman of my age, where I am a little bit more set in my ways, perhaps. So, but that doesn't mean we can't make life changes and philosophy changes. It's just like takes some more work.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what kind of changes are we talking about? Like subtle changes, like maybe, changes to your skincare routine or changes to your, or are we talking about real behavioral?
Well, I think about the first episode of the season, which is about this young woman. She's like 20s, and her mom gets real sick and she has to become a caregiver. And then she changes in this uncomfortable way where even when her mom gets better, she's still really anxious. So she's like panicked all the time. Anytime somebody calls her, she's like, what? And she winds up taking a clown class. Because she was always a little interested in comedy. And she's like, I just need to do something that's not the same thing. And she's like, why do I feel so much better all the time? And based on age, based on the fact that it was an activity that forced her to be really aware and present, like fall down and be silly, it started to change her. So that was like a big structural, I feel less anxiety. Then there are like changes that we didn't ask for, maybe. Like we have an episode about somebody who goes through perimenopause and then menopause and is like, oh, I changed drastically. And like, that's just because bodies change.
Right,
So
right,
how
right.
does it change her, right? Like that's going to happen no matter what. And she's like, she became a better dater.
Oh.
Interesting.
Yeah, like she was like, when you're like 28 and you're guided by certain desires, you make a lot of very stupid decisions. And she's like, I still have a great sex life, but I'm choosing people with clarity in my brain.
Okay. I was going to ask what makes someone a better dater. Is it just the people she's choosing?
Yeah, like she's like,
Yeah.
I don't need to be with anybody. And when I do want to be with somebody, I can like see them for who they are as
Okay.
opposed to just like, whatever her body wants to see them as.
Gotcha.
And then we have people who moved and found great change. So that's a big thing too, where people will say, maybe I didn't change, but I felt like I changed because I saw myself differently.
So are the changes that you're talking about in relation to a relationship?
In all of these cases, it's changes that make their relationships better. And those relationships can be romantic, and often they are, but sometimes they're just like, I was a better friend. I felt better about things. We have my favorite episode of the season, which is not incredibly relatable to many people, but really interesting, is a woman who spent most of her life feeling like she was just kind of weird and seeing things weird. And it turned out she literally was. In her 40s, she got diagnosed with face blindness. She had no idea she had this. And
What?
she has no visual memory. So the story starts, she basically walks up to her husband in the grocery store and is like, why are you buying all of these snacks? And after a few long seconds of talking, it is not her husband. He's like, I don't know you, lady. Stop criticizing my snack choice.
What?
She tells her husband, I just went up to this other dude. I thought it was you. And he's like, you do that all the time. He also said, when you watch a movie and there's like action in the movie, you physically jump back. So she was like, I need to go see like a brain doctor. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And it turns out, she said to me, when you picture an apple, do you picture an apple, a physical apple? Do you? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
She doesn't. She pictures like a concept. Like she didn't know that many people could picture an apple. So here's the other interesting thing about her relationships. She said she never understood why friends took a while to get over a breakup. Because when she's done with the relationship, she puts the pictures away and then it's gone. So she can remember things, but they don't. So much of our like feelings are about actual memories that we can put smell, touch, visuals to. She's got none of that. So she was like, all my friends are drama queens that cannot get over breakups. And meanwhile, she's like, and then her husband, by the way, was like, so I realized that if I like went away tomorrow, she'd be fine. Which is devastating. So talk about a change. Like they had to deal with what's the meaning of that, and how do you make peace with that? So some of these changes are changes in the way we perceive ourselves. But in that way, it's made their relationship better because he said none of her memories are tainted by weird other stuff. They're not tainted by fake stuff and filling in gaps. And whenever she's in the moment, she's in that moment. So and she said, you know what? I'd never take pictures of him down. I'd want to look at him forever, which was actually quite sweet. But
It is.
you know, for her, it was this big relief where she was like, I had no idea that when people said they pictured a sunset, that they pictured a sunset.
Wow.
That's
So-
like a weird version of 50 First Dates.
It totally is, and it reminded me of like, you know, just these sort of medical mysteries that you're like, oh, I thought it was this, but it was that. And
I've never heard that before.
No.
Face blindness.
face blindness and just a lack of she's two things, lack of a visual memory as well.
How
So-
did it take so long to get diagnosed?
I guess if, you know, her husband was saying, we all think we have the same experiences as other people. And like, we all think the color blue looks the same to us, and it probably does, but maybe it doesn't. And she also reminded me that there is another side to this, which I feel like we can all relate to more, which is people who are so visual about their memories. Like I told her, I can tell you the color of the blue tile the first time I was rejected by a boy. And it was middle school. And I remember being in the moment rejected by Jake Limbert, you know where you are. And at like 10 years old, 11 years old, I asked him to a dance. And he was like, you know what? I think I just want to go with a group of friends. And I was like, no. And I know there was tile, it was blue, and she said, yeah, now you're stuck. Like people who have trouble getting over things, who sometimes get stuck in a bad thought, are very visual memory keepers.
We were just talking about that this morning. Leroy was bringing up a heartbreak from his childhood, and you kind of go back to that, and some parts of you don't get over it.
Oh, yeah. And I wonder if it's been studied, if people who just really feel that years later, and I do, like if your memory is really just good, too good. I think about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and I'm like, maybe we're supposed to just like go blank a little bit, like, or at least be able to reframe it. So some of these changes are not at all what I expected. You know, we have some serious stuff. We have like a Middle East episode about an Israeli woman married to a Palestinian guy, and sort of they were getting a divorce and got back together in the same house when all of these more recent conflicts started. So it's like not the change you would think, but and then we've just got we've got a woman who moved to Italy and like just changed, and why aren't we all just moving to Italy and living our best lives? It's like one of those things, right?
Yeah.
Of like sometimes change is that simple. You just pick up and move to like Under the Tuscan Sun and do Under the Tuscan Sun.
I love that movie.
So yeah, no, it's really. So I just wanted to. I think all of these seasons for me are like whatever selfish question I want answered. Like, I'll be like, well, can I change? Am I going to be like this forever about certain things? And then we'll get into it. So I'm just really grateful that people come on and tell stories. Which yeah.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that with the stories that are being told, there's a lot of great stories, and some of them can be pretty heavy. How do you deal with it personally? How do you process it? And
it's interesting because some of the heaviest stories are the lightest storytellers. So it's interesting to me over the years to see that there are people who've lost multiple family members and loves, and they are very funny and frame it in this way that is incredibly hopeful, and they feel very grateful. And then there are other people where I think, oh, this is going to be breezy, and it's not. And so what I've also learned is that, there's nothing wrong with feeling your pain. But I have learned a lot from people who, even this woman who's face blind, right? It could be a devastating thing. Like there is a grief to knowing you will never see things the way other people see things, and that you don't get it. And she could not, very quickly, she moved from grief to a deeper understanding of herself. So I think that that's what I try to pull from it, because every now and then I'll be like, whoa, this stuff's heavy, right? But it also makes me feel less lonely. Like for every time I've been like dumped or felt lonely or been like, well, am I the only, it's there are other people out there getting dumped too, and they're also figuring out new ways to live. And for me, I've also enjoyed talking to people who take part in relationships that I have no courage or interest in trying. We've had a few episodes about open and polyamorous relationships, and I think people are much more open about that literally, and also about talking about it, and hearing about it makes me feel like, oh, there's so many ways to do this, and I can pick a way or not pick a way, but like there isn't one right way. Some of the happiest people I've talked to, even off mic. This, I'm thinking of one couple in particular that had a great story, and I'm like, what a perfect couple. And they're like, oh, and sometimes we're open. That was not said on mic, but I was like, this is really, and they were like, it's kept us together for decades, right? That sometimes, and they have boundaries about it. And I was like, oh, well, I wish you said that on mic, but that's really cool.
Yeah.
that this works for you. So yeah. So some of the sad stuff winds up being kind of happy or hopeful at the end.
How do you find all the people, and how do you decide who you want to dig deeper into?
Well, some I pursue. Some I pursue. A lot of listeners will write in. So we have a woman on this season who tells a story about addiction that is quite sad and also hopeful, where she moved to South Africa for a guy who had an alcohol problem. And what she learns in the process of dealing with that is that she also has an addiction issue with relationships. Like, she can't not be in one. She gets obsessed with people. So through his rehab treatment, she started being asked to go and was like, oh, wait, I am also in this thing, right? So she wrote in and was like, I want to tell this story because sometimes we're so busy diagnosing everybody else that we don't realize that we need to change ourselves. So we have listeners who are very forthcoming. And it was interesting for the Italy story. I was like, I'd love to know somebody who just like did that romantic move that we all want to do. But like, we all know, like when you move to Italy, you got to pay an electric bill in Italy. Like, is it as like sexy and amazing and perfect as we think it is? Or are you just like, now I'm on a countryside. I don't know anybody. I don't speak Italian. And even just Googling that, all these people came up. And I wondered, some of them did tell me, we picked the right one, but some people did tell me, yeah, like I got here, it looked dreamy, and then I had not a friend, right? And then all the friends were like, I'd visit you in Italy. Like, it's actually hard to do. Like, so sometimes we seek it out. And I had really wanted to do an episode that did not pan out. If anybody wants to give me this episode in your own story, I had this theory that people who change and become marathon people, this is going to be controversial in this area, right? Because of our marathon dedication, that when you become a marathon person, capital M, capital P, you change so much that it could affect your relationship.
100%.
There you go. I know people who are like, now
100%.
I have to, now the vacations I take revolve around
100%.
The San Diego Marathon, the whatever. And also that kind of schedule, I mean, it's different than dating a golfer who's on the course all day. It's like, it's a constant regimented schedule. So if you change and become a marathon person or just like a super athlete in some way, does it change too much for the relationship?
100%, because that's usually a person who, like, just at baseline, they're very type A with stuff. And if they're with someone who's not like that, all of a sudden it just alters everything, because every morning they have to, no matter if it's snowing outside, well, I still got to get in my 13 miles or whatever. And some of them do it to the point where they adjust around if they have a partner and family and stuff, and they go, okay, stuff at home starts getting going at 6. I'll get up at 3 and bang it out before that, or do it after or whatever. But some let it bleed in, and if the other person's not on board with that, 100%.
But it works if both are.
If both are, I mean, my wife and I are kind of like that. We're very, we logistically do a lot of.
Yeah.
Like, we just sit down and we're like, all right, we got to do this. So, like, a lot of things that if I was with somebody who wasn't like her or vice versa, it would definitely creep in.
And you all have done the vacation to go marathon, haven't you?
Well, when we go on vacation, the first thing is we're like, all right, does the place have a gym? If not, where are we going to work out? But that's just part of it. But
Not
it's
questions
easy.
I ask.
But it's easy because we're both like that. But if I was with somebody who wasn't going to be like that, and they're like, oh, we're going to go to this great place, and I'd be like, what's the gym like? What do you care what this gym like? We're on vacation. I'm like, listen,
Like,
it doesn't matter.
what are we eating?
But yeah.
What are we eating?
So,
I mean, I do think, like, if somebody has an equivalent hobby, right? If, like, while you're marathoning, that could probably work. But it's interesting. When I did a call out for this, I got a lot of people being like, you're wrong. This has strengthened my relationship. This has, we run together, whatever. And I kept thinking, well, of course. the runners themselves are going to be like, this is fine. And the people who are quietly like, I guess I'll wait at mile 7 and clap again, they're not going to even, like, that's harder to share. And you know, I also can believe that if you are in that kind of group, right, if you're running, you're meeting people who are so like-minded that there is the potential also to meet
100%.
somebody who's better suited for you.
I know people who've done that.
Yeah.
They'll do like the CrossFit thing or whatever. Next thing you know,
CrossFit
divorce.
couples, right?
Because
Exactly.
they get-
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
it was a story I wanted to tell, a story I still want to tell, but all of the brave, you know, the people who root on the sidelines at mile whatever. I have done this for a friend I have who runs marathons, and I really enjoyed doing it. Now, would I do it twice a year at the 5K and like be like, keep going, like, drive there like yay, and or just travel somewhere just because there's a marathon? Probably not for like all the time. It's like a special thing. So I think a lot of things can change you. And I also wonder, you know, people have been telling me about articles about Ozempic, right? About how much it changes brain chemistry. So a drug like that, what does it do to other parts of your life, right? Does it alter you in ways that are unrecognizable to somebody, maybe in good ways? I thought
They find it like with addictions and things like that it's like affecting people with smoking and drinking.
Yes, I did hear that too.
So that could be a great improvement. It could also be like, wow, I'm kind of, you know, people who've been married for a long time tell me, because I have never been married, like they'll say, I've had 3 marriages with the same person, right? It feels like, in a good way, like we reinvent ourselves, we evolve. It's not the same as it was in the beginning. So I think there is some of that change that's inevitable and perhaps quite good, but I think it must be a real adjustment.
Real quick. So, excuse me for not knowing, but for how long have you been doing love letters?
So the column is now in its 16th year, which is berserk because it is. That's a long time. And I also think about the early days of it. Like there was no Instagram.
Right.
Like actually, I remember the first letter I got about somebody writing in to say somebody had slid into their DMs on Instagram, which of course we didn't say slide in. Somebody was like, someone contacted me via Instagram.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's rude and invasive. Well, now that's not. In fact, at the time I was probably saying, don't text someone to ask them out, call. And now I say, like, if you're calling somebody, like, how dare you? Like, that's like for emergencies. So just social trends and how we communicate has changed. The podcast since 2018.
Okay.
And every season we try to pick a question that a bunch of stories can answer. So my favorite question is still the first season in terms of a question, which is like, how do you get over a breakup? Because when I started the pod, and I remember the Globe said to me, can we do a whole season with breakup stories? I was like, I could do 50 whole seasons about breakup stories. Like, this is the bread and butter of my job. And it's also the most positive season in some ways, because after every breakup, most of the time, you get to rise like a phoenix. Like there's the whole, like there's the makeover montage in our real lives. There's the I learned. So it was really uplifting. This one is turning out to be like that too. My other favorite season is money. We did one about like what's the deal with money in relationships, basically, and I loved talking to people about that. We have one episode about prenups that made me feel like a prenup is the most romantic thing you can ever.
Get out of here.
This couple, the way they framed it, they both had a lot of trauma in their lives from past relationships. And with the prenup they have in place, they both know they could walk at any time. And there's nothing more romantic than knowing somebody could walk at any time and that they'd both be okay, and they choose not to walk every day.
It's all
And that's how they see it. And I was
Okay,
like,
that is the perspective is different.
they set it up so that both of them would be completely fine if it dissolved. And so every day is a choice. And that was a real turnaround for me to say, you know, and one other couple where one helps the other get out of debt, and he was like 30 grand in debt, and it was secret debt. And the punchline of that was, I was like, am I allowed to ask what you bought? And it was like all LARPing stuff. Like live action,
Live
good
action
face.
role playing.
Oh, thank you.
Stop it.
The geeks that fight each other with fake swords in the park.
Okay, I am learning so much today.
Like I did not
Android
expect
lady.
this man to be like, I bought swords. I bought like, I was like 30. I mean, it wasn't all that, but it was a lot of that. So it just people telling me their financial secrets was a lot of fun. It made me feel better also because I was just like, you know, you have to learn to be okay with money and like just. I've never spent 30 grand on swords. I'm doing great.
So I was asking about how many years. You said 16 years of love letters. Okay. The society has changed a lot in those 16 years. I'm curious, what have you noticed when it comes to love in general? What has been like really huge, significant changes in the way people think about love?
I think people are really tired. The dating fatigue is really hard. And as apps have become so easy, it's like, and this has been a few years of this, where I miss the days where people could open a computer, like a laptop, go to a desktop, go on their Match.com or whatever, do that for 40 minutes or a half hour, and then you close the thing. Then you have your day. Now you could be doing this in the bathroom. You could be swipe, so it's like, I'm not doing this enough. I'm doing this too much. And we're dealing with this with social media in general. Like, how much is too much? How does it affect our brains? And how does it affect our ability to see that there's really potential with somebody in front of them? So what I noticed during lockdown, which was a whole other thing that affected the column, was people were like, oh, I don't have to do this. I'm like told by the world that I should stay home for a few months, which means I don't have to do this. And they were that tired. Like, there seemed to be this euphoria of, I get to not think about this and have an excuse. So that's a thing that I did not notice in 2009. Like, people were tired of dating, and dating is hard, but they weren't feeling like it was a job, that if they weren't swiping 24/7, that they could miss their soulmate, that's a huge thing. And, I just think people are scheduled and busy, and everything is hard to make space for. I also think that I also see these up and down trends of marriage. Like, why do we do it? When, people who are really into the concept, who are not into the concept. I think I now see in letters, it's like taking it back for themselves and figuring out a way of doing marriage that they want to do it. So it's but that's the big one. In the beginning, it was all snooping. Everybody was, this is the other thing. In the beginning, people were constantly writing me because they broke into their partner's text, Facebook pages, whatever it was at the time. Now we have two-step security. You can't do, it's harder to do. So it was really easy to just hack away at your...
That's how my last relationship ended. This was in 2011. He was in the shower, and I was going through his nightstand, and I found letters, like actual letters from an ex. And when I brought them up to him, they were completely innocent because they were from before, but I was just asking questions, and that ended it because he never trusted me again. He was more so, why are you going through my stuff? I gave you no reason for you to go through my stuff.
It's interesting because there's a lot of debate in our comment section about, is it worse to snoop or to be caught doing something bad? Like, because so often somebody's caught doing something bad and they're like, but you snooped. And in your case, that's not the case, right? And it's interesting what's forgivable when you want to forgive and what's not. We have a lot of commenters who will be like, snoop away. Like, because if something is making you feel like you should, there's something else going on. It's interesting when you feel like you don't have to. But I think that if you happen upon I love when people write in and they're like, I happen to see, and I'm like, you happen to see.
It's never happened to see.
Whoops.
You were looking.
I fell down upon an email.
Right. And in my case, with the underlying thing, it was insecurity. It was my own insecurity. And to this day, he and I are friends. He's married now, but he calls me the snooper to this day. And it's just, I know for me, it was my own personal insecurities.
Well, it is interesting. I do get letters about people who are worried about why their partner is saving, a letter. What does it mean? Does it mean there's still great love? Does it mean? And I'm always like, it probably means that they like to keep pieces of their history. Maybe they're face blind and they need a visual reminder.
Face blind. Yep.
It's a really good excuse. I need a
excuse
visual.
Unlocked.
Totally, right? Exactly. But it has changed a lot, and just the technology piece of it. I mean, it's. There was a phase where people were like, I don't like how this person conducts themselves online. Like, they seem nice, but when I look at their Instagram, they're gross and all they do is self-promote and take weird selfies.
Yeah, that is so true. That's a whole nother aspect. Because you see the way someone's online persona, and you can automatically be turned off by just the way somebody posts online.
It's true. And
Which is crazy, because they could be a really good person.
Well, I have noticed that some of my oldest friendships, I don't know that I would like them if my introduction to them was through social media.
Yes.
And part of that is that if there are some friends in these kinds of jobs that we're in, right, where they have an obligation to, they're engaging with the public, they're promoting a work that they're doing, right, where I'm like, I get it. you have a book coming out, so do I. Where I'm like, oh, I have to do this too, and it's part of the job. but I don't really like to look like it's unfair, right? That we judge people based on that. And I have a very shy friend who is really like just a totally different character on Instagram, and I'm like, well, that's weird too, right? I know her as being really quiet, and on Instagram, it's like crazy selfies and all sorts of things. So I'm like, what have I not known, right? But it's unfair when we do that Google of someone, and right now I'm getting a lot of like political letters, which I pretty much only have one answer for.
Well,
yes,
sucks.
you're allowed to break up for one reason. You're allowed to end a long marriage for that reason. I don't care. Yeah.
It just sucks because people who are dating online, there's just so many more. I always talk about this with my friends who are dating online. I'm like, let me ask you a question. At what point do you have the talk of like, should we delete our apps? At what point do you have to talk about that? Like there's so many extra factors that you got to worry about now that you didn't have to worry about before. Like, because people want to fast forward the relationship. Yeah. You know what I mean? Before you're just getting to know the person and stuff. And now you're like, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
And people forget
It's true.
that you have the right to change your mind about even politics.
Yes.
But if you feel about this right now and I feel this way about it right now, then we can't be together. Whereas before you'd give it more of a chance.
I mean, it's certainly with the politics stuff, it's so polarized now where like there's like these big reveals, and maybe it was always this extreme and we just lied to ourselves. Sometimes I think about the 90s and I'm like, what was happening? I don't really know that I don't know. Boy bands were happening. Everything, gas was cheap. But like I do, there's a lot more to talk about, and there's a lot more to be paranoid about, because when the snooping was happening, there were all of these ways to get information, and we didn't know the answers. Now you might be able to see who you're dating and what they ate for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, because there are these posts. And then we start writing a story about it. Well, one of my favorite podcast episodes is a woman whose ex was following her on Venmo. So this is why I'm very private on Venmo. He shows up at her door one day, basically in tears, and says, I know you've moved on. I know you have a partner. And she's like, I'm single. Like, I haven't really moved on from a breakup. But what he was seeing was a little egg emoji every Sunday. And he was like, but you have brunch with this man every Sunday, and I've looked him up, because he's seeing it on Venmo. And she's like, yeah, that's like he's in my running group. Like, he buys us all egg sandwiches, and then we Venmo him.
Oh my God, that's
crazy. But he had
crazy.
written this creative story about her new boyfriend who she had brunch with. And this is scary, right? Like, too much information is also bad, because we start to augment it and supplement it. And like, sometimes an egg is just an egg.
Yeah, and sometimes you got to set your Venmo to private. Set your Venmo to private.
Says the girl who's snooping through her boyfriend's drugs.
That was a long time ago.
I always make the joke with Melissa about this too, that I think that people try and fast forward stuff. So I always say to Melissa, like, when she meets a guy, they text bomb the hell out of each other Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Go out on a date on Friday, go out on a date on Saturday, and by Sunday they're over each other because they just did.
It's like too much.
Well, they just did 18 months worth of a relationship in less than a week. Whereas normally, if you're getting to know someone, you might go 3 or 4 months and be like, hey, what's your middle name? I don't even know your middle name, so.
It's like a job interview. You want to get all the answers to the questions that you need to know if you're compatible right away. Like, you need it to happen right away, and if not, move on to the next. It's crazy.
It must be good to date like a teacher, like somebody who during the day is not with their phone, because then they're not going to reach you at many hours of the day. And also it like paces the relationship. I find that with remote work, especially for a lot of people, they're just much more available, through that. Like, I mean, I'm assuming that when you guys are on air, you're like not able to... You're all like texting under your desk. Yeah, you're like, we're not even.
It depends. It depends.
I'm on my phone the entire show.
Yeah, we are.
You're like texting with listeners. But like there's some level of being present, and I know that if like you're dating a doctor, I'm sure they're like not gonna respond to you that quick. And
or a construction worker, or somebody has to work with their hands.
Down. Yeah, and that I think is. I mean, I'm trying to sort of stay away from my phone certain parts of the day, just because I realized I was like getting one step.
Oh my God, that's
especially in the winter, you're like, what if I put my phone down and I become a bad TV watcher? Like I keep having to rewatch things because I wasn't really paying attention.
yeah.
Oh my God!
There you go.
Hello, we were just talking about
You
that.
should
I do
join
that.
our phone-free February challenge.
Oh, I will absolutely. It's really hard. Like I'm trying to figure out Severance, and I'm like, I must focus on.
I
the
was told I
Severance.
need to watch that.
No, do it.
Oh,
Do
okay.
it.
That's got to be added to my
I
list.
mean, it's a good distraction from
Okay.
everything else in the world. But yeah, but no, I always wonder with really coupled married people for a long time, why are they public on Venmo? And then you're like, paid wife for like electricity bill, and it's like a lightning bolt, and I'm like, I don't need to know that. Because of my job, I'm very interested in how people split bills and do they share an account or whatever. But I find it really weird. Do they want people looking?
I think some people just don't realize it. That
I don't think
Venmo
they
is
know.
private like
I
that.
didn't
Like
know
they
you
just
could
don't
do that.
realize it. I think.
Sometimes, now I sound like a snoop, but it is my job to think about this stuff. But sometimes I see couples that obviously have somebody cleaning their house. So it'll be like, I am paying for the, like, and then I'll just be like, oh, you have somebody cleaning your house. Like, that's, like
Yeah.
I start getting jealous of
Yeah.
the services they're reimbursing each other for.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is why, Leroy, I think last week you were asking me like why I don't talk about like my marriage, my relationship, and it's because everybody finds a thing that works in a different way. Like I knew a couple, well, maybe this isn't a good example because they ended up getting divorced, but they would split. When I tell you that they would split everything, I mean they would use the same toothpaste, but she would buy a tube and he would buy a tube. Like it wasn't even because she was using the white, and the marriage didn't work out. But my point was, hey, if that's what works for you guys, then that's what works for you guys. And then there's other couples who I think the basics, like the root of the tree is like whether you're gonna be, monogamous or whether you're gonna open the marriage or whatever is communication. Like I don't see many couples who are like, what works with us? Lying and not telling each other the truth. But I mean, besides the being open with communication, everybody has different stuff as far as like the way they handle money. Sometimes it's like, yeah, he does everything, but I take care of the stuff at home. Other times it's, oh no, he makes his money, I make my money, and then we have a pot of money in the middle. Like everybody's thing is different,
I think the money thing is so big, and not because of just money, but because it forces communication or lack thereof. Like my accountant always tells me, I know when people are going to break up before they do. Because there's starts to be a weird like positioning of lack of communication, or if they're married, like some money gets moved, or like what questions are asked, like, well, what if next year we didn't file like this way?
Wow.
So he's like, I always feel like I have this like, extra piece of information that I should not have, but they give themselves away by moving money around, by spending it differently.
You talk about, we're talking about dating and about love and all of that stuff. I'm curious to find out, are there people such as myself, are you finding more, who have decided, like, I'm not going to date, I just want to be with myself, I'm happy by myself? Like, are you seeing, is there any kind of trend like that? Or
Your episode was really important to me, and it was important to me as somebody who is, I am coupled now, but that is more recent and not how I've spent most of my life. And being unmarried and in my now late 40s, like it was just really important because it did represent a trend, and I think you put a name to it in a more specific way. But what I see is usually women who are dynamic and wonderful and all of these things. Even if they're going to date, the model for primary care, that sounds like doctors, but like a network of support will never rest on one person being a partner. And that perhaps they have also been single for long enough in their life that they already built a community of support and in friends and family. So if they wind up with someone, it's a piece and it's additive, but it's not the model of essential, this is how I've finished myself, or this is how I will, we did an interview for the podcast, a woman who was very sick with cancer, and she had to, this is depressing, but she had to fill out all this stuff of like, who's taking care of this, that. And as a single woman, she said for every line that she needed to do, like medical proxy, who's called for this, she had a different friend. And the person, I think it was at MGH, looked at her and said, it's fascinating. If you were married, it would just be like the same person for every line. And in reality, one person cannot do all of those things.
Right.
So I think a lot of people who are, even if they are coupled, they are like you saying, I've got this whole world and that is my priority. So I haven't heard as much of like, I'm just not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not saying it, but that is what they're doing. I mean, a lot of them aren't dating. A lot of them are saying, why would I be scrolling all day and swiping all day when I could actually be traveling the world? And one of the biggest demographics growing is women who live alone and women who are incredible. So it is a trend. And even when those people find love, they are saying, it's not my be all end all. It's an important thing and it's not everything. And that I think is better for the relationship, for the romantic relationship they're in, because it doesn't put so much pressure. That hospital thing really hit me because I was like, no wonder so many marriages like seem like they are failing because you're asking of one person be everything.
That is a lot. And that's a lot of emotional, like to make all of those decisions is a lot for one person.
I wouldn't be able to do it. So
Yeah.
who can? Yeah.
Oof.
You mentioned hospital, and sorry, bear with me if I'm being a little bit extra, but it made me think of doctors, and you seem like you are a love doctor.
Oh, God.
So
no.
no, just hear me out. So if you're a doctor and love in 2025 walks in the door for a physical,
Okay. Ooh,
all right?
Okay.
What's the bill of health of love in 2025? 10 being excellent, 1 being just in shambles.
I do want to say that I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. So before we say that, I think there's a lot of potential. And this now I feel like a psychic. I'm like, here's what I envision for 2025. I think this is a clarifying year where people are being really upfront about their priorities. And that can be great because, and I think this has to deal with politics, COVID, weather, name it. What do you want, right? And if we're all saying what we want a little bit more and even asking ourselves that, we might be more likely to get it. So sometimes we beat around the bush with ourselves and other people, and that's what I see for 2025. You want to go home and feel really comfortable. So what would make that home really comfortable? Is it the partner you have? Is it taking a stand and saying, I'm not dating at all and I'm going to travel the world and be amazing? Or is it, I'd like to find somebody, but not somebody who will treat me poorly? Like, that's what I feel like, that we can do that this year.
Do you think people are more clear about what they want? Because I think a lot of times people didn't really, a lot of times people are like, I'm not sure what I want.
It's also hard to admit what you want because what if you don't get it? Like, what if you say, one criticism I've received from letter writers and commenters is they'll say, you just say go out and make friends and build your friendship community like it's easy. And I've lived here a long time, so it did get easier. And they say, I'd have an easier time finding a nice boyfriend than 6 women friends that I can spend all my time with. And because the inverse was true for me, I set up a certain way of thinking. So I do think it's like, it can be scary to say, I want to be single and travel the world and have great family and friends when that doesn't seem like the easy thing to do. Like, what if I don't get what I want? So I think sometimes it's just about really taking a beat. And it's okay if you don't know what you want. Like, and you can want one thing and then 5 years later say, I want a totally different thing now. Like, that's okay. I think we're all very loyal to past versions of ourselves. At least I have been, where I'm like, but at 25, I promised myself this. And in fact, when I started dating the person I'm with, I was like, but I'm not a person who would have a boyfriend. Like, but like, okay, like, I'm probably not. That doesn't mean I don't have one. So it's like I get like, where is the betrayal? I guess I think. But I think we could have a healthy year despite a bunch of other.
I heard the word potential, so that's good. There's potential.
How many episodes are in this?
Like 13, 14. They go every other week, and we're doing some talkbacks, and we have a great producer who I'm doing some analysis with, who actually took a trip to Italy with a guy she didn't know that well in February of 2020, and now that's her husband because he lived there. She visited him and was like, I'm going to try seeing this guy. And then February of 2020 in Italy, like we all like she could not come home. So she tells a lot of interesting stories.
Because she was forced to get stuck. That's what you need. People have there are options to
Grab
like leave.
everyone in Italy.
Yeah.
We need to make relationships more like what do you call those things like at Apex, like where you go in and you have to solve a riddle to get out.
Oh my gosh, like an escape room?
Escape room.
Oh my gosh. That's
sounds crazy,
That's
but it makes
horrifying.
sense.
No,
Yeah.
it makes
Yeah.
total sense. Think about it. Like if you want to learn a language, right? You could do the Duolingo or whatever. But if I just took you and dropped you in Italy and left you there for 3 months, you're gonna come back in 3 months and be fluent because of the immersion. So you need to like really immerse yourself and not think that it's gonna be just this perfect 10 out of 10 every day and be like, you know what? Okay, today was a shitty day. Let's work through it. I could have done this better. They could have done that better and figure it out that way.
I've always said that if anybody made me do an escape room, I would just lie down on the floor and wait until somebody figured it out. So I don't know how I would do with that particular metaphor, but I do think there's something to giving something time.
Yeah, I think sometimes people just don't want to. They don't look in the mirror on like what they need to do. I read a book. Actually, you would like it. It's the book. The guy. It's on that Harvard study, the 80-year-old Harvard study on health, and it turns out that it's about relationships.
Oh, the happiness one.
The happiness one.
I
Yes, the
liked
happiness
that
one.
book. I
Yeah,
read that
okay,
book. It was
so-
I thought it was really interesting.
So there was a story in there about this gentleman who was in the military. He was in special forces, went in as like 18 or 19. And every time they went to check in, his mom was like, I don't know, he's somewhere. He's on a mission. And they just thought that he just kind of like disappeared. They didn't know. Guy turns up in his like 30s. And he was like in his mid 30s. He actually was away in special forces. And he said, you know what's messed up right now? If you took me right now and dropped me in a jungle in a foreign country, I'd survive like that. He said, but I have no idea I don't know how to make friends. I don't know how to get a girlfriend, because usually those are the things that you go through all those different relationship things in your 20s, early 30s. He skipped that stage. So now he's like in his 30s and he has to just like join a bowling league, do things like that just to make friends and he eventually got with a woman who was divorced, had a couple kids and stuff, but it took him forever because he's like, I know how to do a lot of utilitarian stuff, but I need to figure out how to literally make friends. So I think it's a lot of people, I don't even know if that they don't realize that. Sometimes they don't want to admit it out loud.
I think friendship is, I mean, I've heard this especially for straight men. It's like the hardest thing.
100%.
It's so hard. And when we read loneliness studies, it's like a bunch of guys being like, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but I will. Like, it's really like, and they want to hang out. It's like this weird gateway into how do we do it. And I think like liking the same thing. Like I know guys who are like, if there's a hockey game, we all get together, and then we don't get together. And I'm like, but what if there was a different thing you liked that you could do? Like it's hard. It's hard.
I think people, I think they think when you get to a certain age, like the friends you have are the friends you're always going to have. It's like making new friends. They have apps and stuff now to make new friends, and it's harder when you get older because it's just harder to find people you have something in common with.
I've made a lot of friends in the past year and a half.
Those BS friends, man.
No, listen.
Oh,
I
we
My
both like
love of BTS. I'm telling you, I have friends I'm going to a concert in New York.
No,
with,
it makes sense because you're doing it. That's what it comes to eventually. That could be replace BTS with a bowling or like painting or a cooking class. And
absolutely. I think around interests, it's really, really helpful.
I mean, we bonded because I knew you. Like I was like, she likes all the vampire stuff I do, and like she likes romance. She likes reading, and she, it's like this is how we build bonds, and you kind of get somebody's taste, and the marathon runners find each other that way.
Yeah, right.
And then they cheat on their spouses.
And then they
Snoop
They cheat
and
on
everything
their spouses
else.
and go, if you just ran and weren't so lazy. No.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just have to say, because you had mentioned your producer, for anyone who listening or watching who hasn't listened to the podcast, it is so well produced.
Oh.
It really is. And the way that you tell the stories is just so engaging. And I just absolutely love it. So, kudos to your team.
Well,
and how
thank
can we
you.
listen in case people don't know where to go?
It's called Love Letters wherever you get your podcasts, and the column is boston.com/love letters. But yeah, you'll see you'll see the little Boston Globe thing, and people from all over too, so not just here.
I love it.
They did an episode on Pebbles.
They did.
I know, I love
And
it.
It's like honestly,
She
it's
called her Susamito.
Shut up.
It's one of my favorite. It's just one of my favorite episodes because it does represent a trend. And I think a lot of people saw themselves in that episode. And I think for the Boston people, they loved hearing the radio voyage also. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thanks for
Check
having
out
me
Love
in.
Letters.
So great.
I know.
Like and subscribe and all that crap that
All that
people say at the end.
Yeah.